Joining me today is a legend of both stage and screen, one of the stars of the Emmy-nominated X-Men '97, and author of the soon-to-be-released A Rogue's Tale, the one, the only, Lenore Zann. Lenore, thank you so much for joining me today on the channel.
Aw, thanks so much for having me, Sugar. It's great to be here with you. And you are only the second person I've talked to who's actually read my book so far. I haven't given it
Yes.
to very many people yet, so thank
Believe
you.
me, it is truly an honor to be one of those people to have read this because, first of all, congratulations on the book.
Thank you.
I had 2 days to read it. I read the thing cover to cover in those 2 days. I couldn't
Wow.
put it down.
That's
It's
great.
almost overwhelming how much life you lived up until now. The places you visited between Nova Scotia, Australia, the USSR, Cuba, even New York, my native town of New York.
Yes.
What made you
Yes.
decide that now is the time that you wanted to share your story?
Well, to be honest, many of my friends have said throughout my entire life I needed to write a book about a lot of the adventures that I've had. And I never really had the time because I was too busy living. And the adventures just kept coming. It just seemed like I was a, a sort of a battery that attracted lightning, like wherever I went, interesting things happened. So I never really had the time to spare until just 2 years ago. I started writing the book 2 years ago. Um, I'd left acting for 12 years to go into politics, which I talk about at the last couple of chapters. And I ended up winning, 3 elections in a row as a state or provincial member of the Legislative Assembly in Nova Scotia. And then I was asked to run federally for Prime Minister Justin Trudeau's party, the Liberal Party of Canada. And I won. And so next thing you know, I was off in Ottawa in Parliament, becoming a member of Parliament. So for 12 years, I was busy doing that. And then because of certain circumstances like the pandemic, also we had a terrible mass shooting that happened in my constituency. During the pandemic, a whole lot of things happened and I lost my seat. So suddenly I was tasked with what do I do with the rest of my life? And I was also extremely depressed and grieving the loss of my dear, dear, sweet little niece, Maya, who died at 17 from cancer. And all of that, losing that seat, losing my member of parliament seat, losing my sweet niece, all of it happened at once. And then suddenly I got a lifeline, which was I got the word that Disney was calling and that Disney wanted me to come back and play a superhero again. So I felt like this was the perfect time for me to write a book about these experiences.
Yeah, and with that, I don't want to spoil anything in the book, but there's so many wonderful full circle moments in your life that, like Disney being a part of your past as well as your future. So I don't want to touch too much into that, but it's crazy. Like you said, you lived so much life that you had such a successful political career and you barely touch on it in the book. You maybe mentioned it briefly at the end, just because there was so much more to talk about, which I found so interesting.
Well, thank you. I had to make a conscious decision as to, when you're going to write a book about your life and you've had so many different adventures, I call them, it's kind of the first question is which ones are you going to use? Which stories are you going to use? And I realized that I didn't want to write a 400-page book. I wanted something that people could get into, that a lot of the fans of our X-Men show could relate to. Young people looking for sort of their purpose in life could relate to. And so I decided to focus on the acting years. And then I figured that if the book is successful, if people like it, if they like my writing style, then I will write a second book and I will focus more on the political years and what it's like to be a female politician, which, believe me, has a lot of stories as well. But I just didn't have the time to go into them this time around. I'll do that next time if people
I can
like this
only
book.
imagine. I mean, speaking
We'll
of
call
your
it
writing
something
stuff,
like I was going to say we'll call it something like Rogue Goes to Parliament or something
I
like
love
that.
that. That's a great title for a sequel.
You
Definitely
know.
a catchy title. Speaking of your writing style, something that
Mhm.
really stood out to me when reading the book is I found it interesting that in your autobiographical recounting of your life, that you make an effort to shine the spotlight on so many different people. Some of the names that
Mm,
come to mind from off of memory are Mrs. Ping and the conversations she had with, of course, Mummy Marshall, who was such an impactful person in your life. And
yeah.
another one that really stood out was your father and the loving way you discussed him, especially towards the end of the book, and how he essentially became a pillar of your ideals in terms of masculinity. And I found all of that
Yes.
stuff so interesting. How did you decide to approach your story this way, like involving so many other people outside of yourself?
Well, I wanted to talk about the people that had a major influence on my life in the early years. And of course, my early years, when you read the book, you discover were first of all in Australia. Going back and forth between the city, being a city kid in Sydney, Australia, taking ballet classes and seeing what it's like to be in the theater with all those people up on stage with the beautiful costumes and the music and the hush that comes over an audience and the excitement in the theater when a show's about to start. I had that as a kid influencing me, and my mom's influence getting me to take dance lessons because she had taken dance lessons and had won all kinds of awards as a young dancer herself. But then going between that and then the country, which we call the bush in Australia, Karua, where my grandmother lived, and learning all about the nature and the animals and the flora and the fauna, and having my first friends being these indigenous kids that lived nearby on a reserve, and Mrs. Ping, who looked after them, and my grandmother having this great relationship, these two older ladies, and us kids running back and forth between their houses, and in the meantime, look, checking out all the animals and stuff like that, and hearing mythology and fairy stories and stories about witches and dragons and the beautiful Aboriginal indigenous myths. So I wanted to set it with that in mind, because years later, when you come to realize that I went into politics and that I introduced a bill about environmental racism, which is the disproportionate number of toxic waste sites, dumps, landfills, and corporate polluters that are placed on or beside racialized communities, meaning Black communities usually, or Indigenous communities, which really affects it adversely affects the health outcomes of those communities. You can kind of tie together why I would be so interested in doing something like that and introducing a bill that would hopefully help alleviate that problem. And so that's kind of why I tied the bookends together there. And of course, my dear dad was a writer himself. He wrote books, he wrote poetry. He got me interested in writing and reading poetry and short stories. And he read to me as a child by my bedside, at night. And he was a really comforting influence. And he was very strong in his own sexuality, that he had women around him, that he didn't ever exhibit any kind of toxic masculinity or rage or any kind of thing like that. He just was an ally throughout my life, and always said women can do as much as they want to do, and in fact that women are oftentimes smarter than men. you know and I mean, he was a true feminist, and I love that. And I think mentioning that for men, they need to hear that
Absolutely.
sometimes the ideals that are held up to them of what it's like to be a man is not necessarily real or true, and that it's okay to be vulnerable. It's okay to cry. It's okay to be, for want of a better word, soft and kind and compassionate. This is what it's like to be a true male who can appreciate women for who they are and help them along the way. So that's why I wanted to also talk about my dad. And plus, towards the end of the book, I was going through, as I was writing it, the last 8 months of my dad's journey on this earth. He was 90, turning 91, and he was on his way out. And I felt like the best gift I could give him was to come home and be there with him and read to him at night at the hospitals the way he had read to me as a child. And it definitely is an amazing memory to have. And I don't regret it for a second.
Yeah, and it was beautiful to read. I mean, it hit home for me. I lost both of my parents in 2021, and
I'm
my
so
father also.
sorry.
Thank you so much. My father also
Mm,
taught me a lot about masculinity and being a man, and not being too rigid and allowing yourself to be vulnerable. So a lot of
right,
that was very
exactly.
relatable, and I think it, like you said, it's very important for a lot of men to hear, especially in this political climate and in the world we live in today.
Yes, absolutely. And, if I can help people get a better idea of that through the book, I think that that's a good thing too for men to read and to realize, oh, I'm okay the way I am. I'm good. I don't have to be this fake tough guy that's,
Yes.
putting on this big, huge stone persona. No, you don't need to be like that.
Yeah. And just to touch again on your writing style, one of the things that really stood out to me about your book was that the way the writing was both formal and informal. It was like
Hmm.
I was sitting at a table listening to you tell me a conversation. And I don't know if that was the
Fabulous.
intention of your process or if that's just how the writing took shape as you wrote it. Can you describe a little bit like what your intentionality behind your writing style is, or was that just like a happy accident?
No, I think I mean, I my writing experience, as I said, I started writing poems first, poetry, and short stories when I was very young. I was about 8 when my dad got me into writing. And I won a public speaking contest. I think I talk about that in the book. When I was about 14, I wrote a story about coming to Canada, my new home, I called it, about coming to Canada from Australia. And I wrote it, and then I also I recited it. I spoke it at a public speaking contest, and I won. I came first. And years later, I ended up writing a play when I turned 40. I wrote my first play about Marilyn Monroe, which I did in New York, and I talk
Yes.
about that in the book. And the thing is, my style is very conversational. I also wrote a lot of speeches for myself as a politician. I didn't really like the boring old way that they tend to write speeches. It is just so pedantic and your eyes just glaze over. And I'm like,
Yeah.
oh, for God's sake, the worst thing you can do is bore people, as far as I'm concerned. I don't want to bore people. So I would write my own speeches and I'd throw in anecdotes and I'd make them as personable and as conversational as possible so that regular, ordinary people would understand what the hell I was talking about. So this is the experience I've had writing, and I just started doing that and writing it almost like it was a diary, and I was talking to a dear friend about my life. And I wrote it over the last 2 years. I tended to write a lot when I was on planes because you are captive in a seat. You can't do anything.
Yes.
You can't be distracted by going into the kitchen and doing something. And I found that actually I slipped into the zone of writing very well when I'm sitting on a plane. So I went home to Australia after dad died. I decided to go home to Australia to see the family, the larger Zann clan, who I'd grown up with as a kid and remembered my dad fondly, all my cousins, his brothers and sisters who are still alive. And I had 16 hours from LA to Sydney, and I wrote 4 chapters. And then on the
Wow.
flight back, I wrote 4 chapters.
That's
No movies,
incredible.
just wrote. Yeah, it
That's
was
really
came in
impressive.
very handy. Thank you.
I'm sure you were inspired because, you do mention those cousins and extended family in the beginning of the book. So I'm sure that helped bring back a lot of fond memories of growing up.
Exactly. And also being able to connect with them and be reminded of things that had happened and reminded of what dad was like and what he was like
Yeah.
to his persona for others, and also seeing all kinds of photographs of our family, which I was then able to use some of them in the book.
Yes.
Some
Which I
historic
really liked.
pictures.
Yeah.
Yeah, pretty
It was a nice
amazing
breakup
finding
point.
those.
Yeah. It was really
Good.
nice to kind of see the people you were talking about like come to life in those pictures halfway through the book. It
Right.
was a really nice touch. Without revealing too much, because we do want people to buy the book, so we're not going to
Yeah.
spoil the contents of it. I will say that there were some pretty shocking revelations inside. Some stuff that I don't think many people know or have known about you.
No.
And with a life as full as yours, there are sure to be ups and downs. And the way you present some of the most horrific moments is actually what I consider to be very bold. You chose not to focus on the tragic nature of these events, but instead creating moments of vulnerability where
Yeah.
you're while also discussing the wrong and right ways of handling these situations. What made you decide that you were ready to share these very personal moments with a wider audience?
Well, because one of them I think you might be thinking about was when I had this terrible experience in the home country where our ancestors came from, which
Yes.
is now called Croatia and was at the time called Yugoslavia, when I was raped in a shower by a stranger that I had trusted. And I haven't spoken about that publicly. I didn't even speak about it privately, really, to very many people. There were a couple of friends who knew that I talked to when I came back from Croatia. But for the most part, I just decided to bury it. I was ashamed. I felt scared. And I also just was in denial because I talk about it in the book how when something like that happens to you, your initial reaction is oftentimes, this didn't happen to me. This couldn't happen to me. How could I be so stupid? And you blame yourself. And there's a lot of victim blaming that goes on in the world.
Of
And
course.
we are the worst blamers of ourselves.
Yeah.
um, I basically said, and in the book I talk about it, how I decided, well, this didn't really happen to me. This just happened to my body. And my body's not me. So I'm just going to throw it under the rug and forget it ever happened. But 30 years later, I go, all of a sudden, it's coming back to me. There was another traumatic experience that happened. Well, my niece dying, all of that stuff, and all of that pain started coming back. Also, in the '90s, when the war started out, the Baltic War, and we were seeing all these horror stories of women that were being raped and in rape camps and being slaughtered or their families slaughtered in front of them, and then they were raped by all these soldiers. And suddenly it all started coming back. And the way I dealt with it when I was drinking was I drank more. I drank more. I used drugs. I did whatever I could to not feel and not remember and just try to shove it back inside and put it under the rug again.
Yes.
But eventually, you realize after you shove enough stuff under that rug, when you go to try and shove some more stuff in and you lift it up to shove it in, there are all these eyes looking at you from under the rug, and it's overwhelming. And that's when you have to deal with it. And so I wanted to share that with people so that if anyone else has gone through something like that, they can realize, no, I really should address it. I should get some therapy. I need to share it with a safe person or
Yes.
others, and not have it build up and become toxic like it did with me, where I ended up having, I was an alcoholic and I was doing drugs and all this stuff, and I needed to quit. It was either that or I was going to die. And I decided that the braver choice was to live and face my fears. And I knew that I had to quit drinking and using, and that was back in 1996. So it's been 28 years now since I've been sober, And I'm very,
That's
very
amazing.
grateful.
That's
Yeah.
amazing. And
So if I can help others, that's kind of part. That's why it's my book. I've got to tell my story. It's part of my
yes.
story. I'm ready to tell it now. And B, I really want to help others so that if they go through it, they can relate to it and they can be inspired to get the help they need.
Yeah, and it's so powerful because there are some moments in the book, and it says so much about you that you never wanted to make that moment about Croatia or generalize the
No,
people of Croatia. It was you just
no,
emphasized that it was a bad person doing a bad thing, and that these people are
exactly.
not all bad people. And I think
Yeah, it
that's
can
also
happen
important.
anywhere. Yeah, exactly. Thank you. Thank you for noticing that.
Thank you for sharing. I'm sure it was not easy, and I'm sure it's still
No,
not easy to talk about it. So thank you for talking about it here. I appreciate you feeling comfortable enough to bring that up.
you're welcome.
On a little bit of a lighter note, what one of the things that I found really fun in your book is the idea of the gimmick, and you talk about it in a few chapters about the idea that you had these friends in your life who had gimmicks and you needed a gimmick to be successful in show business and that
Right,
you avoided that path and that you much rather were interested in taking roles that interested you as a performer and that could leave an impact and give meaning to
right.
people. So what I want to know is looking back on your career and looking forward as well, are you satisfied with your legacy as an actor or as a performer?
Not yet. I feel like I've still
Great at
got more more roles to prove myself. Not necessarily to me, but to others. Um, and plus, as an actor, you just love to get a hold of a juicy role and get your teeth into it and be able to embody it and then get on stage or on film and perform. And I still have that. Um, X-Men, the animated series, gave me a little taste of Rogue, but then X-Men 97 gave me the opportunity to really show my chops as an actor using my voice. She goes through all the gamut of emotions from A to Z or Z, and I used that. But I'd like to be able to have that opportunity on film now. And there were a couple of films I did where I was able to do that, but those films, one of them never got released. It was called Black Mirror, about women
yes.
in prison, a French and Canadian co-production. That one never got released, which is so much a shame. And it was the scenes from that I had copies of that Steven Spielberg had seen, which was why he
When you
wanted to
went to the
meet with
meeting,
me to
yeah.
talk about the Temple of Indiana Jones and the Temple of Doom, and then led to the New York casting agents also bringing me in for Love Sydney for NBC. So yeah, so there's a part of me that still feels unfulfilled there. And also, I mean, I'm not saying no to ever going back into politics again someday, too. So, I have more to do there as well. So, between the acting and the politics, I still have a lot of things I want to do.
I mean, if 2024 is an example of what's yet to come, boy, I'm so excited to see what you do next because it feels like you're hitting a new stride in your
I
career, and I'm
am.
excited.
Thank you
Speaking
so
of
much.
Rogue, no problem, of course. Speaking of Rogue, the name of the book
Yeah,
is A Rogue's Tale.
right.
And in it, you discuss things like the hero's journey and talk in depth about the impact of the X-Men. And it's clear that you and Rogue share a lot of similarities in your personalities and your characterizations. But more importantly, the character seems to have left quite an impact on you as a person. Why do you feel that characters like Rogue speak to people so much?
Well, if I knew the answer to that, I'm not absolutely sure, other than the fact that I think Rogue in particular touches people in a way because she's very vulnerable, yet she's very, very strong as well. She has strong values, principles, once she becomes a good guy and goes with the X-Men, of course. Because of
Yes.
course at the beginning she's a villain in her early days. But I like to say that she when she got kicked out of the house by her father at an early age, she was left wandering around going, where the hell do I belong? Who am I? What am I going to do with my life? Which I can relate to. And I think a lot of young people can relate to. Not the kicking out of the house part, but just the wandering around going, why am I here? What's my purpose? And then she Mystique, she hooks up with Mystique, who becomes her foster mother, but Mystique leads her down the garden path and uses her and manipulates her for her own ends, to the point where, when of course Rogue almost kills Ms. Marvel, when she drains her of all her life force and takes it upon herself, and that is how she gets her special superpowers. um she realizes, this does not make me comfortable. I am not comfortable being this person. And that's when she breaks from Mystique, and then she's lost again. But then the X-Men call out to her and say, hey, mutant, you're lost, you're in pain, you're lonely, you don't know where you belong, but we have a place where you belong. You belong with us, with the X-Men. And she finds her family, her found family, and starts to really believe that this is where I belong. Now, I think a lot of people can relate to that. Plus, Rogue will put her own safety aside to fight for others. Anyone else who is downtrodden, who's being picked on or bullied, she will fight for them. And I think people really appreciate that. And many of the fans who come to me at Comic Cons say to me, Lenore, you were with me in some of my worst hours of need. Your voice was in my head saying, as Rogue, it's okay, sugar. You can do this. You can handle this. You can leave that abusive boyfriend, or you can make it to that next surgery, and I'm with you. And it gives me an amazing fulfillment to hear these stories that are so moving, and to know that my character and my voice has helped people through some tough times.
Oh, absolutely. Your role as Rogue is one of the most iconic vocal performances of all time. I think that you're neck and neck with Kevin Conroy's Batman as one of the
Wow.
most iconic comic book voices. And I know you hear this all the time, but I'm going to tell you again, when I read Rogue in the comics, your voice is always the voice I've heard and will continue to hear
Uh,
whenever I read that character. So I think your
well,
legacy
thank
will always be
you.
linked with that character.
I appreciate that. I guess I've been living rent free in your head now for about 30 years, huh?
Exactly, just about. By the way,
Wow, thank you.
congratulations
Yes.
on the success of X-Men 97.
Yeah,
As
right?
someone who consumes a lot of film and TV during the year, X-Men 97 is still my favorite project of 2024. The show pushed
Wow.
boundaries. It's part of a wave of projects showing people the importance of the animated medium of storytelling. Did
Uh-huh.
any of you guys returning from the animated series have any inkling of the idea of how well received this series would be and how big it would become?
No, we had no idea how big it was the first time around. Right? I mean, you probably read some
Yeah.
of the stories where we were in the dark the whole time. We didn't realize until about 5 years ago, when we were invited to have a little cast reunion in New Braunfels, Texas, at a Comic
Oh,
Con there. Um, we were invited there, and suddenly there were all these fans there telling us that we changed their lives, that we made their childhood. Um, and then we were invited to LA, to the LA Comic Con later that same year. And there were 100,000 people there all screaming for us when we came out on stage for a panel. And we all looked at each other like, what's going on? And we're all Canadian, the original cast. So we're pretty self-deprecating anyway. And we were just blown away by the response. And so then, we got together again for another Comic Con after that, and we said, we went for dinner. We met the Leewalds for the first time, who are the original writers, and
yes.
Larry Houston, the original director. We'd never met them before. So we got
Really?
to meet them. No, because we were all in Toronto
Uh huh.
recording, and they were in LA. And so never the twain shall meet. They used to FedEx our stuff, or they used to send it by mail. I don't know. They put the tapes together and send it by mail to LA back then because there
That's
was no
incredible.
internet, there was no email, there was nothing. So they would send it by mail. And we never met those folks in LA. So we met them, maybe like 4 years ago. And then we all said, wouldn't it be nice if somebody bought the rights to the show and brought us all back and redid more episodes of X-Men, and we toasted to that, and we said, well, we're going to put it out to the universe that this is what's going to happen. And man, here we are. And the show's a huge success to the point where we had a premiere in Hollywood and at the El Capitan Theater, where yesterday I walked by and there was Brad Pitt and George Clooney having one. And then the Emmy Awards, and we're nominated for an Astra Award. I'm nominated for an award for that
Yes.
one. And we're like, wow, who knew? So we're thrilled, and we just love our fans. Our fans are the best. We love them. They are part of our family, and it just feels like we are part of this X-Men family, and it's a community that keeps growing. And many generations now, like 6-year-olds, 7-year-olds, who are watching it with their parents.
Yes.
It's fantastic.
That was actually one of the things I wanted to ask you because, X-Men, the animated series, introduced an entirely new generation of people to the X-Men and to X-Men comics. I was one of those people. That show is what got me into reading like the Chris Claremont X-Men comics. And now you have
Right.
97 doing that again, and you have
Yeah.
different generations of people picking up on the X-Men for the first time. Like my partner Nikki, this was her first exposure to these characters. And
Right.
so yeah, it's honestly crazy that you guys are able to do this generation after generation. And do you have any like inkling of an idea of what makes these characters special and why they're able to appeal to so many people throughout the years?
Yeah. What I think about why the X-Men are so popular is because it's really our modern mythology. It's like
Yes.
they're like mythological heroes, like the gods and goddesses from Greece and Rome and all of that. And the stories that are told are pretty universal. If you look throughout history and throughout different cultures, there are similar stories that are told. And we're retelling them in this new modern vein of superheroes. I think it's interesting that when Larry Houston, the original director who created the show and was the first one to really try to sell it to the Hollywood studios back in the 90s, he went around to all the different studios trying to sell this idea of doing a series, an animated series about all these superheroes who are kind of like misfits that have been thrown together and found each other. And to a T, all the studios told him, who's going to want to watch a show about superheroes? Like, who's going to want to watch a series about superheroes? Like, they just didn't buy it.
Yep.
Well, 30 years later, all you have to do is walk down a plane aisle and everybody's watching some kind of superhero thing on their devices or on the plane.
Absolutely.
And in our show, when he finally found someone, a woman, by the way, Margaret Lesh, who had just taken over Fox Kids. She was as the president of Fox Kids Network. She said, I'll do it. And she was told by her superiors, if it's not successful, we're going to ask for your job. She went, it's okay. I'm willing to take the risk. And she did. And that's why we're here. And then, of course, the X-Men franchise started off in the 2000s after that. But our series was first. And as you said, it's so nice that it's getting people to read comic books, too. And that kids who get involved in X-Men 97 are now reading comics as well. So it's lovely to see this, this happening, this to and fro with reading and also with watching the show on TV.
Yeah, and you spoke about your performance as Rogue and how you felt like you really hit a stride during 97 portraying the character. And I mean, your performance in episode 5 is truly haunting. The entire 30 minutes is a roller coaster, shifting from traditional melodrama to tragedy and then ending in heartbreak. What was it like reading that script for the first time? Did you know how impactful that last moment would become in terms of the superhero genre and just pop culture in general?
Well, when I got the script, I recorded season one mainly in Halifax, Nova Scotia, which is where I had been living since I went into politics, since I came back home to Nova Scotia where my parents were and my sister and her kids. I bought a house there and I was asked to run for politics. And so I did, I won. So for 12 years, I was doing that in Nova Scotia. And then, as I said, then I lost my seat. And then X-Men came calling. So I recorded it in a studio in Halifax. I'd been going through a deeply grieving period for the loss of my niece, who, a 17-year-old who I'd been with since she was little. It was just heartbreaking. My whole family was broken up by this. My dad and my mom lost their only granddaughter. My sister lost her only daughter, and I lost my niece. So when I got that script, my immediate thought was, I can relate to this. And I don't have to do any emotional homework as an actor to portray what grief is like. I already know. And I looked at it that this would be an opportunity to channel that grief into my performance so that other people would feel and hear the authenticity of it. And hopefully, if they had lost anyone that they loved recently, which many people have because of the pandemic, because of all of the wars that are going on right now, and because of mass shootings and all the different things that are happening, I felt like a lot of people are grieving right now. And I hoped that my performance might be able to help them feel their own feelings and maybe have some healing, like let the tears come, let them cry, help them cry, and have a cathartic experience and get some healing from that. That was my hope. And watching what happened online, it seems like I kind of managed to do that.
You created a shockwave through the community. I had so many videos of people crying and feeling this emotional catharsis at the end of that episode. And your final line, "I can't feel you." It's like I said, it's absolutely haunting. And I truly think that your performance in episode 5 is a masterclass in voice acting. And that
Thank
should
you.
be studied in a lot of voice acting classes because that just shows people that voice acting is acting. Because what a
It
performance.
is. Thank you for saying that. When people say to me, well, how does someone become a voice actor? I'm like, well, actually, you really should become an actor. The
Yes.
best voice acting is acting. You need to have some acting chops. And, I started in theater at the age of 15, became professional at 16, 17. So I became professional. And then, I had my first starring role at the age of 19 and did that for many years and got into movies and TV at 20. And then I didn't start doing voice until I was 30. Really, I didn't start adding voice onto that. So, I'm a well-rounded actor and I continue to like to do it all.
And it shows. It comes through in the performance,
Thank you.
100%.
I really appreciate
One
that.
thing I feel like we have to talk about is your Emmy look. As
Okay.
a comic book
Yes.
fan, I mean, to me, that was an absolute statement maker. As someone who grew up reading comics, who still reads comics, seeing you hit the red carpet in Luciano Vecchio's Hellfire Gala Rogue Year 3 look was like sending a message to these people
Yes.
that the characters and these stories matter and that the superhero genre is not one that you should be ashamed of. Was that the plan going into it, or was it just kind of like you wanted to feel closer to the character?
No, you hit it on right. You hit the nail on the head. All of the above. I wanted to
I
bring
mean, I
pop
love that.
culture into the mainstream. Mainstream Emmy Awards. I wanted to be a superhero animated character come to life for all our fans that are out there watching and let them know that yeah, we matter.
And you nailed it once again. Absolutely nailed it.
Thank you.
As you can See, I was a child of the 90s, so along with X-Men, I did grow up with as well with the Power Rangers. As you can see the helmets behind
Mhm.
me. And I know that coming up,
Right.
you're going to be a part of one of your next live action projects is going to be Legend of the White Dragon, which is the final
Yes.
film from Jason David Frank, who we lost tragically a
Yes.
couple of years ago. Is there anything you could say about your role in that movie or the project in general?
Yeah, I've already shot it.
Okay.
Um, I ended up meeting Aaron Schoenke and his father Sean Schoenke, who wrote and directed uh, the Legend of the White Dragon. I met them at I think it was at the LA Comic Con a couple of years ago. And they said, "Oh, we love your voice so much. We love your work, da 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 da." And they said, "You don't happen to sing, do you?" And I went, "Here's a CD." I had a CD with me of my songs that are now on Spotify. And they were like, "Oh my God." I said, "Why do you ask?" And they said, "Well, because we're going to be doing an animated feature film for children that is a musical that has songs. And we need someone for a particular character like you, and she has a song." I said, "Well, I'm happy, follow up with me." And it was called Space Bears. And they ended up getting in touch with me, and I recorded it last last summer, not this past summer, but the one before in LA. And then they asked, and that's coming out next year. It's called Space Bears. It's about these little
Okay.
bears from outer space whose mission is to go around to dying planets and try and teach the inhabitants to protect and preserve the environment. So it
Oh
was like right
wow.
up my alley as
Yes,
a
of course.
politician and as a person. So anyway, so we did that, and then Aaron called me and said, "Lenore, we're doing White Dragon, and we have some spots in the script that need to be filled out because sadly our lead is no longer with us. So we've had to rewrite the movie in certain parts and insert things to be able to make the story more, more able to be followed. We have a role that we're writing for a broadcast journalist at the beginning, off the top of the movie. Would you come and do it for us?" And I was like, "Of course, sure." So, so I shot it maybe like 2 months ago here in LA for them, and I'm just thrilled to be part of it. And I met Jason David Frank's daughter. I met her at a Comic Con recently, and she's in the movie too.
Yes. Jenna,
So
right?
yeah, so that was pretty something too. We really bonded as well. So I'm honored to be part of it, and I can't wait for it to be ready to come out. I'm not quite sure when that will be, but I will be there whenever the screening happens, and I'm sure that the Power Rangers fans are going to be really thrilled.
That's amazing. That's awesome to
Yeah.
hear. Very excited for that to come out. Lenore, before I let you go, when is the official release date of the book?
And in the States, it's October the 15th.
Okay.
So in Canada, in Nova Scotia, we're having a book launch in Halifax, October the 11th. And then the book comes out on the 15th. It should be available on Amazon then. At the moment, you
Okay.
can pre-order it. You can pre-order it through indigo.ca, and they will ship it to wherever in North America. But October 15th is the actual date. If you want it at your local bookstore, please ask your bookstores to bring it in and stock it. And I will be going to different Comic Cons, Cincinnati. I'll be having some books with me there to sign, and Houston in December. But I'm also going over to Auckland, New Zealand, and Brisbane and Adelaide,
Wow.
Australia. So I'm going to be taking some books with me there, limited copies to sign for the fans there as well.
That's
And I
amazing.
really
And
want
guys,
to come to New York. So I definitely have a book launch in New York, and I'll let you know when
well,
that will be.
are you coming to New York Comic Con for a
I was
day?
planning to come there for one day, but I'm going to tell you something. We're okay with having this in your show. I just booked a new series, an on-camera live action series.
Congratulations.
Thank you. It's for Syfy, CNBC, And I'm not allowed to say the name of it yet, but I've got a recurring role in it. And it's going to be starting to shoot. Well, it's already starting shooting this week. I come in and start shooting in October. And it means that I won't be able to likely come to New York after all because I'll be shooting. But keep an
Well,
eye
as
out.
sad
It's
as I
based,
am for myself, I am happy to
yeah.
hear that you landed another role.
Thank you. And it's based on an on a horror comic series that was very popular, and now they're turning it into a live action series.
Wow.
So keep an eye out for Syfy and CNBC. They'll be making an announcement any day now.
I'm very excited. And make sure you save a signed copy of your book for me because when I
I
run into you,
shall.
I definitely want to get it
Thank
because
you.
I absolutely loved it. And guys, if you want to read A Rogue's Tale, please go to your bookstores, tell them you want it, make sure they stock it for you, go pre-order it. If you care about Lenore and her career, trust me, you don't want to miss out on this book. It is really wonderful.
Thank you. And again, go to indigo.ca if you want to pre-order it and have it delivered. And it will be available on Amazon later in October.
Awesome. Lenore, thank you so much for taking the time to speak to me. I truly appreciate it.
No problem. I appreciate you, and I appreciate you putting up with all the cars that are going by and stuff. But I'm this is my last day in LA before I head on this big long tour. So I'm trying to get things done as much as possible before I leave.
Yeah, listen, it's in perfect Lenore fashion after reading the book, so I'm just happy to have the experience of getting to chat with you.
I'll get to meet you in real life, I'm sure, in New
Hopefully,
York.
definitely. I'm
Yes.
counting on it. Yes. When you're in the
Thank
area,
you.
let me know.
I will. And say hi to your partner for me.
I will. Absolutely.
Say
Thank you so
Rogue
much.
sends her love.
Oh, she'll love that.